Thank you for listening to Buffalo What's Next on WBFO. Buffalo What's Next is on summer break and will return with new content shortly. As we take this break, please continue to tune in to WBFO Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. and 9 p.m. for producers' picks of some of our favorite episodes of Buffalo What's Next.
How can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
On today's episode of Buffalo What's Next, Summertime Producers Picks, we look back at 3 segments from last year. First, we look back at a segment from September 21st, where Jay Moran speaks with Stan Martin from CAI Global and Ebony White from Buffalo Health Equity Center. Then, Thomas O'Neill White speaks with Canna House president and founder Reggie Keefe from November 9th. And we close out with Jay Moran speaking with filmmaker Terry Jones from September 1st. First, Jay Moran with Stan Martin and Ebony White.
What are some of the top issues when we talk about health inequities in our community?
So for us, our focus has been around housing, food and nutrition options. Also, COVID, that has been on our main focus for many years now. And also the healthcare delivery system. So we look at a lot of those things, and overall the social determinants of health. Everything that impacts you from where you work, where you play, if you don't have the option, the options to work, or where you get your education. So we're looking at everything holistically, everything that impacts someone of having what we would call a high quality, right? High quality life and access.
And there's some real stark numbers available when it comes to if you live in some zip codes in the city of Buffalo, just can you go through just when it comes to mortality? The difference that we see? The
differences are those who live in particular zip codes. So if I was to say 14215, 14208, 14211, 14212, just to name a few, you're likely to develop some of these chronic diseases and other comorbidities and live less than your counterparts that live in different zip codes by like 10 plus years. That's stark, that you can see in data and look at the trends of that something is saying because I live in a particular place, I have lack of access to particular things that are important to a quality of life, that my life will end much sooner than someone that lives in a different zip code.
And Stan, you were originally from Buffalo. You've come back to open this office for CAI. You've been here for a couple of years now. Right. So talk about what you've learned since you've come back.
Yes, great question. One of the things that I learned since I came back, and I actually knew before I left,
hasn't changed that much.
Hasn't changed that much, but in all seriousness, like Buffalo is strong. Oftentimes, we don't hear about the great things that are happening, in our city. And in terms of healthcare and in terms of healthcare services, we oftentimes have focus on a narrative that blames and shames the community. And one of the things that we're very, very vested in is changing that narrative and amplifying the youth voices, and as we like to say, promoting what's strong and not what's wrong. So building on the assets, building on relationships, with the faith community, building relationships, with community residents who have that lived experience, who in some cases may have been left out of the conversation or didn't have a seat at the table or even a voice at the table. So what CAI and Reach does, Reach is a project of CAI, what we do is really amplify those voices so that the people are a part of the solution and not seen as a part of the problem.
That's interesting, that term that you use, blame and shame. People really feel that's a view inside these communities that they're being blamed for the problems that they have to endure.
Correct.
That's. Correct. I mean, can you expand on what they're seeing and what they're hearing about that?
The simplest way is someone said if they wanted more, they would do this or do that. So that's creating some level of shame for our community members. But if you don't have that as an option for you, so part of trauma, right? Trauma is eliminating choice. many times our community lacks choice and options and say in these spaces. So that's where it becomes this blame and this shame, and that I have to live and be in the condition that I'm in always. And that's why it's so important and critical what CAI is doing, the Buffalo Center for Health Equity, and others in this space to give choice, to say that you are not the blame. This is infrastructure that was created systematically that impacts you, and you're not the cause, but you definitely will be a part of the solution to it, and that you play a major part in versus someone else doing it for you, but that we have what we need to do it for ourselves.
What about that then? So how do we make that change? This is something that's generations in making here in Buffalo, right? And probably in a lot of other cities across the United States as well. But you're talking about trying to change that narrative. What are some of the steps that you've seen that can help with that?
Number one is asking the community. We believe that the community, has the answer. So when you're talking about addressing, for example, food security, or when you're talking about addressing, the social determinants of health, instead of coming in with the program and saying we're going to do this for you, you need to come alongside and stand shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, with individuals of that community and with residents, so that you can really see, the issues through their lens, and not from, from a position of, well, I'm from afar, or I sit high and I look down below, So therefore, that is a different perspective.
So trust sounds like this is a big issue here, right? I mean, that
Yes.
there just is a lack of trust with what the general medical healthcare system.
Yes. Lack of trust that they're heard, often, or even seen. Do you really see me when I come in that room? I've spent extensive amounts of time talking with community members about that they are a consumer of a service, right? And you need to be seen, you need to be heard, and there's a way. And then talking to healthcare providers saying, did you hear this person when they shared these symptoms, or did you ignore them? And often, sometimes people leave feeling ignored in many of these spaces. So that's why building trust and just being a people of humility, right? Being able to connect just as humankind is really about having those conversations. If we have a disagreement, hey, I didn't like it, that doesn't mean they need to leave. You have to have some restorative practices, right? And I think we've started some of those restorative practices, and just with the conversations.
Yes, and if I could just lean in a little bit more on that, in terms of having those conversations, it's very important that we're providing access with those providers and healthcare providers and those interviewers, let me say, are from the community or look like others from that community.
Okay.
You may have heard the phrase, the messenger is just as important as a message. So one of the things that we try to do at Reach Buffalo is to really amplify the voices of the residents and also of physicians and providers of color, so that they are having conversations. When I say they, the community is having conversations with someone who looks like them, or someone who have a similar experience, a shared experience. So that helps to build that trust and rapport, with the community.
Let me follow up with a question, because I think we've heard about this before, but just to clarify, there is a shortage of people of color, though, who are providers of healthcare. Is that the case here?
That is the case.
And of course, recently a tragedy involved Dr. Daniels and his two daughters, of course, that took away a key member of the community in that regard, right?
Yes, a champion at the university in mentorship and supporting African Americans in getting into healthcare and being physicians. So that's hard, because we don't have that, and you want to see that. You want to be able to see someone that looks like you, can communicate with you, and understands your culture, right? in that was a hard, that's still a very hard space for us. But we believe that he's planted so many seeds in our community and young people and youth that they will, they will begin, we will start to see to fruition our leading future doctors, whether it's in pediatrics, whether it's in genetics, whether it's in all of the spaces, and come to fruition, because he did such great work.
Well, let's talk about this for just a moment. The Health Disparities Task Force has been together for some time. Your office, Stan, has been here for 3 years. Is there more that we still need to know that before, like you said, leveling the playing surface, finding these solutions? Are we still in that gathering phase of trying to really understand the problem? Is there more that needs to be dug into?
I think it is always more. But I will say we have not just been gathering without solutions, right? So the task force has been together well over 5 years now. And it was crucial. We didn't know that when we were coming together in a collaborative approach to address so many things, that it would be critical that we had some legs, right? So when COVID came, we had some legs.
Right.
We had some relationships. We had the conversations, the hard talks. We had to get to the place where it say, hey, this is what I'm good at, this is where your strong suit, and we came together to really support and address COVID in our very own community, even with the food and the PPE and the access and the vaccinations and all of those things. So we were ahead, if you will. We didn't know we were going to be ahead in COVID.
Right.
We just knew we needed to get together because we could not do it siloed apart. And the impact that it had when we did it apart, we kept missing. But it is always a conversation when you're looking at systems, right? You have to change full-fledged systems. You do a little repair here and then something else happens on this side, and it all impacts each other. So we have been doing that systematic change, definitely, by even starting with conversations and building trust.
Mm-hmm. And just one point of clarification, CAI, we actually started a program here in the city of Buffalo in 2015 called Hope Buffalo. It stands for Health, Opportunity, Prevention, and Education. And what the community said at the very onset, of our inception is that if we're going to address, the root causes of poverty, we got to address the social determinant health, in this community. So, and as a result of that great work, we've seen this ripple effect in terms of we were able to identify and bring in additional resources, to not only address teen pregnancy, but also chronic disease prevention. And now, as Ebony was speaking to, also was like COVID, increasing education and awareness about COVID vaccination.
So like you said, we've got to listen to the members of the community. They're going to give the answers when it comes to what is needed. On the other side of the coin, though, the providers, those systems where there is health, there are people who are accessing health care in Erie County, in different towns, and whatever the case may be. Perhaps maybe they might have a better means to access these things. But at the same time, right, I mean, is it doctor groups? Is it hospitals, health insurance companies? What's missing? I mean, are there gaps being allowed to exist here that still, like you said, conversations are ongoing? Can you help me kind of understand that a little bit more better?
So what I will say is the task force is comprised of all of those sectors that you mentioned, but there are still silos. So then you may have an insurance company in your space, but they still speak their language, right? So this is about translation.
That's a tough language.
Right, that's a tough language. And it's always about translation. So we have to translate what we need. I do believe that we all want our communities healthier. What does that look like, right? So someone is focusing more on the financial standpoint of it. Someone else is looking at, hey, what is missing in health-wise? Do we need another clinic, more physicians to meet the need and the demand of our community? But it has to be very consistent and ongoing, right? And if you look at all of the policies, and again, when you start looking at the infrastructure of it, you start to see where that will impact that. So we have to have conversations with groups that really weren't in our group before, right? So an insurance provider now might need to talk to a non-for-profit to say, well, when I develop this plan, how would this policy impact you when I put this rule into play? So I think we're starting to do it a little more than we did previously, but privy to that, during disrupt time, that put all of those places together. And then as just when it's time period, we see the value of putting all of these organizations together and them working collectively, but seeing how all of our policies may impact in a negative way the other organizations, whether it's in those social sectors too. But we're starting to have more conversations and more action where mental health is now looking at social determinants of health.
Right.
Versus I'm just looking at mental health. You can't look at people just singularly, you know. You have to be able to see in the purview all of the things that will impact you. And social things impact us all. You can't get away from them.
That was Jay Moran with Stan Martin and Ebony White. Next, Thomas O'Neill White with Canna House president and founder Reggie Keith.
What got you into wanting to create a marijuana business, a marijuana-related business?
Yeah, man. Honestly, I've been a consumer since I was young, right? 13, 14, I was introduced to the plant. And so I've always had a passion for it, right? And so that passion kind of paired with my skill set and my experiences really kind of pushed me to the direction of like, hey, I don't want to work for anybody, you know? What can I do that I love? And how can I use the skills that I've already gathered, kind of my work history? And so paired all those things together, man, and it was just a perfect storm for, you know, a cannabis entrepreneur.
As we get closer and closer to legalized sales of recreational marijuana, has there been any clarity from the state on how this is all going to work? What do you know?
Yeah, man. I mean, shout out to the OCM, Chris Alexander, the whole staff. They had a big workload ahead of them. And as a legacy, representative myself, I would say that at first it was rocky, right? There was some real lack of transparency, lack of clarity coming from the OCM. But they've done a great job as of recent as to just reaching out, creating lines of communication, and licensings are starting to come out, right? I do know that there's some things coming down the pipeline that will really allow people to, start to set a tone for, their path for license, life in the cannabis space here in New York. And it's happening. That's what I can tell you is happening.
Yeah, for folks who don't know, what is the OCM?
The OCM is the Office of Cannabis Management. It is the organization responsible for handling cannabis here in New York State as it relates to legislation, regulation, and the rollout of those rules. And so, they are putting together, rules and regs for each license category. There's upward of 8 to 10 license categories. And so the first part of the supply chain has been rolled out, which is growers and processors. There's just been the first 150 retail locations introduced. I don't think they've identified everybody as of yet, but they've taken those applications and they're processing that now. And so right now you'll have the first, open retail locations, hopefully by the end of the year, but probably, first quarter of next year. So, yeah.
You mentioned that you were a legacy representative. What does that mean?
So legacy is what they've deemed representing a group representing those who were operating in the cannabis space before legislation passed, right? So those who were, I don't like to use the black market or anything like that, but, we made a successful go of cannabis operations, so much so that the state gave up and they said, you know what, we need in on that. And so I think this very industry stands on the shoulders of legacy operators.
Expungement of marijuana-related crimes. How does that work? If I've got a possession charge, does the state of New York immediately strike that off my record, or do I gotta jump through a few hoops first?
Yeah, so it's my understanding, I believe there was some auto expungement originally when the law passed, so I'm not exactly sure of what those crimes consisted of. But yes, there is a process that if you weren't like auto expunged, there you can go through, right? There's expungement clinics that are held throughout the state on a regular basis. You can go to the OCM's website, which I believe is Office of Cannabis Management.gov. Excuse me if I misspoke that, but yeah, they usually have that information available, and it's not as strenuous as one would imagine, and it's definitely worth going through the things that they're asking to get that expunged. But yeah, a very, very important part of seeing that cannabis industry exists is making sure that people that got taken away from their families and homes that were broken up are those things are rectified.
Talk to me about for those who are not in the know, what is Canna House? What do you guys do over there?
Yeah, man. So we at our origin is a cannabis-centric social club, but we've really evolved into a consumer resource center of sorts, right? So we focus on we started with activity-based events, so creating dope spaces and safe spaces for people to consume. Right. We also provide product awareness, whether that's through reviews or safe sourcing. We want to make sure people know how to get safe and good quality products. But education and advocacy, those are our 4 pillars. That's what we stand on, making sure that the community knowledge is elevated, because that allows for, the easy integration for these new businesses into the community, right? You can't just imagine you're going to pop up your multi-million-dollar company next door to somebody who absolutely doesn't understand what you're doing, right? So it's important to educate them and get them on board, whether they are investors or just going to be your next-door neighbor, right? And then advocacy, advocating for the consumer. Oftentimes the advocacy stops at the purchase. Once you purchase and you're, have the product or the plant in your hand, you're kind of left to your own, free will to kind of find your way around. And there is an important opportunity and void in the market to make sure that people have a safe space to go to. And we want to advocate for that to be readily available in most communities.
Yeah, and that's why you have the dope spaces, because, not everyone can take their product home and, have a couple tokes and listen to jazz records, right?
That's a fact, man, right? Some people that might be in federally funded housing, you just might have a landlord who just isn't okay with that, right? You just might be in a position where you can't go home and consume, and you need a space that you can do that in comfort and allows you to still stay true to who you are. And so, yeah, we definitely want to make sure we're creating that.
I was taking a look at another interview that you did, and you mentioned the term legal consumership. What does that mean?
Yeah, so consuming as a pastime of the Black community, we've oftentimes just been spenders, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I really was referring to there is kind of the legal consumership of cannabis. But in general, we really want to talk about the maturation of consuming and educated consuming, right? And I think from a place of like maybe just buying your products out in the street, you kind of don't necessarily have a say-so outside of saying, hey, man, I don't really like this product. Next time I come back, give me something better.
Yeah.
Right? But, in legal consumership, you have the ability to leverage your purchase power, right? And so if you telling somebody, hey, I'm willing to come here and spend my money at your space, as a community, if we come together, we can then demand that retail or that location then give us something in return other than just a product, right? If you're going to be in my community, this is what I'm expecting you to reinvest. This is how I'm expecting you to impact the community around you, right? And those things are, I think, a big part of like a mature legal consumer, lifestyle.
So what would that look like then? You've got if you've got someone who is not of the community, that has a business, a power-related business within that community, what does that give back to the community? What might that look like?
Yeah, I think it is dependent on the community itself, and I think it's important that you go and poll and ask that community, what is it that they need, right? Oftentimes people go into communities thinking that they have this plan and they're going to come in and this is how they're going to help these folks. And if those folks don't need that help, then that can be, taken a totally different way. And so it's important for you to go ask, hey, what can I do for you here, right?
Instead of dictating
and say, hey, this is what I got. I'm
Yeah.
gonna give you these crumbs, or I'm going to give you whatever we've thought about in this room with these, no offense, usually like 5 white male guys are in a room putting together this plan, and it is totally void of perspective. And that perspective usually leaves like a tone-deaf approach to, solving some of that community assistance.
Yeah, I want to actually get back to those 5 white guys in a little bit, but in your position, do you talk regularly with people of color who are in this business, looking to get a foothold in this brand new industry? What do you discuss with them if you do?
Yeah, a big part of our approach to filling this void in the spaces, we're a membership-based club, right? And so we have a ton of peer-to-peer and member-to kind of executive mentor conversations where it is exactly that, right? We have a volunteer program where we come and they can help us set up, but in that time, they're just picking our brains, right? Gathering information about, just understanding the industry, right? A big part of it is just laying a solid foundation of understanding the plant. So many misconceptions out there, so many things that we've gotten used to, terms we've been getting used to using that are just outdated or antiquated, and we really need to update everybody, right? So it's like a refresher most of the time. And then, specifically if there's somebody with experience who's like, yo, man, I want to get into this thing. I've been doing this already, right? We really help navigate, the approach to licensing. Right? And so we've gathered quite a few resources, and we try to do our best to leverage those resources for not just our benefit, but for some of those folks that we're trying to mentor.
So do you consider yourself a mentor then?
Loosely, yeah. I think that's the responsibility, the role that I've kind of matured into is, if you got it, man, it's unfair to hold on to it by yourself.
What's it like moving into these spaces? Moving in these spaces with other people of color who have the same vision as you?
I mean, it's so refreshing, right? I've assessed my skill sets over time, and they've really lended themselves perfectly for this industry. And I feel like that's a natural thing for most people of color that I see, right, is this fits us. It allows us to be our full selves, right? I can walk in as me. I don't have to put on a suit and tie when I'm in meetings, right? I can even go in smelling like weed, right? It's not even a bad thing, right? And so those things I feel like
this booth?
Yeah, right. So, you know what I mean? I think that's refreshing to be able to be your authentic self. And then I'm really, really impressed by how serious we're taking ourselves, right? People are getting over here, and it's not about just, hey, a handout. We're like, we're running a serious business over here, and we want to be taken serious. And that is really, really invigorating and is encouraging, and it keeps me going, honestly, for real.
Is there a fear amongst you or the people you congregate with that the licenses to sell and grow maybe in large quantities will eventually or are already being gobbled up by the rich white guys?
1,000%, right? The industry's already 92% owned by white-owned companies, right? And it's a sad story because this is a baby, it's an infant. There's no reason why it should grow up and have to turn into a white-dominated industry, right? We can be intentional about changing that. And big shout out to the majority leader, Crystal Peoples-Stokes. I will always, say her name in the highest regard because nobody's intentionally created legislation to kind of combat that.
Absolutely. Right? She's a real trailblazer.
Real trailblazer, man. The godmother is what I affectionately call her. But she made sure that the bill represented 50% representation of social equity applicants, right? Meaning, folks affected by the war on drugs here, our community, veterans, women, and distressed farmers, right? And so of that group, we fit in a few of those categories. And that's important because if 50% of this industry looks like us, it can truly change our trajectory in our socioeconomic, status here in the country. So
you're listening to Buffalo What's Next. Thomas O'Neill White here talking about the cannabis business with Canna House president and founder Reggie Keith. As I was talking to you about before, I was peeping your Breaking Barriers podcast that you were on. Shout out to Tommy McClam and Daniel Roberts. This is your fourth warning to come on this podcast. Please come on.
I'm gonna send him a text for you.
But on that podcast, also shout out to Dorian Withrow, who was on last week. You were talking about creativity, having a creative mind. That's important to you.
Mm-hmm. So important, man. I think we all, our purpose here is to be creative. And oftentimes our life just creates restraints and constraints, and we kind of box ourselves in. But our full selves is, at the core, built on creativity. And so that leads me, man. Creativity, I think, and innovation is what keeps the world going, right? It's new stuff, and all that stuff is from an idea that was birthed into some work ethic, and then spawned into an actual executioned plan, and then we see that out in reality. But it all started with some kind of creative thought, and so creativity, I think, is essential to any good idea.
How do you put that into what you do with Canna House?
Yeah, so our approach was always like, all right, how can we stand out? How can we be in this space, but how can we create something that's not there? How can we, see these voids and create something that is going to be special, right? And so, again, using my experience, my parents always do these cool little shindigs at the house. And so I knew how to get people together. I knew how to get us and gather us and put us under the guise of something like a good time. And so from that, it was just like, all right, how creative can we get? What can we do to make people feel like, oh man, I've never experienced this before, right? I can consume at the house with my friends. I can consume in the garage. I can ride around and smoke. I don't have to go, spend money to go sit in this event unless I'm getting something I wouldn't get anywhere else. And so that creativity is, like I said, essential to Canna House's, existence.
Can you give me an example of like something you would throw, like a party, a shindig?
Yeah, man. So we're all about activity-based events. That's our niche, right? So it's puff and painting, right? It's cooking with cannabis. It's murder mysteries, kickball, games, right? It's all about taking the consumption and then pairing that with something cool to do, right? And so then that get those creative juices flowing through consuming. And then we find a way to exercise your mind once it's expanded. And
Talk to me about this murder mystery. What was that all about?
Yeah, murder mystery was dope, man. We actually did it downtown Buffalo. It was our first approach at it, but it really was a star. And a lot of people got into really coming to rehearsals, sort of say. Right, we did these Zoom calls where people can kind of learn their character and just understand what they were responsible for doing. And then we get there, we give them a kind of a script to follow, a flow. And then the goal is to find out who done it. I actually died in the first murder mystery. Shout out to my brother Val Shine. He's also our head of marketing. And so he was kind of the other role that found me, and he made a scene of it, and they had to solve my murder.
Okay, so it was like a play then?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. It was everybody's involved in kind of this role play story.
Yeah.
Right? And it's you got a character, and then the goal is to actually find out who done it, right? Like a clue scenario. And so the story was I was a nightclub owner. I was throwing this big event in my penthouse, and I wound up, getting killed. And so people had to dig through some clues that we had left throughout the night. and piecing things together. And it wound up being a really dope time. Again, just using your mind once it's expanded.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the way creativity comes out in like food.
Yeah,
for you.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. I heard the lemonade's bomb.
Yeah, man. Shout out Dirty Lemonade, Dirty Products. We also have a sauce line now, Urban Jane's Secret Sauces. But yeah, man. So we've always kind of tried to like again be on the cusp of like introducing the community to new things, right? And so. One of the things we found along our path of like consuming, I grew up in the era of like smoking, right? Just rolling up 6-7 blunts, we're playing the game, we smoke all day, we just get as high as possible, and which is cool, right? But as I matured, I really like start understanding like there's ailments I wanted to solve, if that's a topical that I wanted to rub on my body, or if it's like, hey, I can't smoke in this place, I need a vape. So I started to develop like a diet, like a diversified diet of like consuming options. Like, okay, I don't have to just smoke a blunt.
Yeah.
Right. And so then from there it was like, all right, well, let's use butters and let's figure out how to cook stuff. And so my brother's actually a self-trained chef.
Wow.
And so just partnering stuff together, we always did this as kids. You know what I mean? Like, he'd been cooking, I've been tasting his food forever, and I was like this mixologist. Like, I always would like mix a bunch of juices and drinks and stuff like that. And so, as we matured, we really started to take that perspective and go, hey, we got some skills, and then we started doing these events, and we were like, all right, well, we want to provide something outside of just the puff and paint or the murder mystery. We want to serve people things. Let's infuse the food, right? And then we're like, well, the social. We learned that, of course, social life is about like the drinks. You go out on the scene, you go to the bar, right, to get a drink. And so we had to kind of fill that void of like, hey, I want to get people something to drink, but I don't want to bring alcohol into the scene. And so, again, those necessities and those needs that we saw that were just like, how do we fill that? We used our creativity to say, hey, we can create products that can fill those voids, right? We want to feed people. Let's cook them some dope tasting weed fruit, right? And cannabis infused food. And then the same thing with drinks. It's like, all right, I want to make sure that people can walk around and get drinks and feel good about the night. How can we do that? And so it was a hell of a process just getting to understanding dosage and how not knocking people out every time you just got them together. And again, man, that kind of like study and kind of maturing from like street knowledge to like real science really helped us kind of like take that creativity to another level.
What's your favorite thing to make?
Ooh, me personally, gotta be the lemonade. It's just our flagship product. It literally is like my baby. It's like the first thing I really like dove heads in on, like being 100% manufacturing of that. And so I understood the whole process from making all of the infused options that we infused the beverage with, to finding the flavors. I've named all the flavors. We got 5 flavors. We just introduced a 6th flavor that is exclusively offered through a retailer out on the Res. Shout out to all of the Res locations, man. They are setting tone as well about how things are moving.
Are we as humans THC deficient? I'm not sure I would describe myself that way, but are we as a whole?
Yes.
How so?
Yes. So my theory is that if you just look back, and this is a shared theory, I kind of adopted this. Shout out to Dashida Dawson, the weed head. She actually just got a dope position in New York City. She's the cannabis czar.
Yeah. Shout out to Dashida.
Shout out to
She's good people.
Yes, yes. So she's like my big dog. So we would talk, and she made this really smart point because she's really smart. And she was like, just think about all of the diseases or the things that ail us as a society. It's all about imbalance. It's all about imbalance, right? Hypertension, or if it's diabetes, or if it's high blood pressure, or if it's cancer, right? These are all about imbalance. Something is overly there or something is deficient, right? And literally cannabis by nature is creates homeostasis, right? It's about balancing, right? It's if you're too high, you take a little cannabis to come down a little bit. If you're a little low, you take a cannabis with the right terpene profile that it can get you a little higher, right? And boost your energy, right? So it's about creating a balance. At one point, cannabis grew freely across the country, right? And the animals that we took in and we ate and processed used to eat that cannabis, right? And so essentially we all used to take in a bit of THC, right? Because even if it was just hemp growing wild, which is hemp is the kind of CBD filled cousin of marijuana that we know about smoking. But even if it was hemp, it still had a level of THC that we were intaking. And subsequently, if we ate that animal, we got a little bit of THC. And I think that kind of is what ties in like the deficiency of that.
We got a few minutes left, and I've got two more questions for you. What's your favorite strain?
Ooh, gun to my head, I can't smoke anything else for the rest of my life. It's sour diesel. Sour diesel. It's just a grandma. It's just a really good smoke, man. Always.
I hear you.
Yeah,
I hear you.
Yeah.
Another question I like to ask my guests. It's very broad, but from your position, from where you're sitting, from where you're standing, what does Buffalo need?
Oh man, Buffalo needs togetherness. We just need to combine the talent that's here. So much talent here, so much skill here, so much energy for greatness that's here. And I think there needs to be something that unites our efforts. We need some kind of joint desire, whether that's just the upward motion of our communities and we all can agree to that. But in some way, some fashion, we need to kind of combine all of the talent that we have here. And
what can be a catalyst for that?
I don't know. I don't know if that's just a group or everybody join Canna House. You know what I mean? Everybody become a member, and then when we meet, we can start to talk about this stuff when we get together. But honestly, that is about a part of why we created this group, is to put like-minded people together, and so that you can share ideas that start to allow you to work together. And I think starting on those small groups in those pockets and growing it out is probably the best way to go about that than maybe just doing some grand project where everybody gets in, because there's kind of too many hands in the pot at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So.
You're listening to Buffalo What's Next. Thomas O'Neill White here, talking about the emerging weed business and weed in general with Canna House founder and president Reggie Keith. Reggie, I want to thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate you guys shining a light and giving this industry, some well-deserved, airtime and coverage, man. We need it, and thank you for all you're doing, man.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have you back on.
Anytime.
Once things really get going within the state, we're gonna have you back on.
Anytime, man. You got me. Thank you to your listeners for taking the time out to listen, man. And yeah, canna-house.com is where you can find us on the web, and follow our IG. It's _house.
That was Thomas O'Neill White with Reggie Keith. And we end today's Summertime Producers Picks with Jay Moran speaking with filmmaker Terry Jones from September 1st.
Terry is a filmmaker, and also he's going to be the curator, or is the curator, I should say, of the Haudenosaunee micro short film program that's coming up at the Birchfield Penny this Saturday. Terry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I want to hear about this because you're going to have 14 different, and we're going to call these our micro short films, so less than 5 minutes, all produced by Haudenosaunee artists. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Last year I was asked by 2 film festivals. One is Micromania Short Film, or Micromania Short Film or Micro Short Festival, and Native Spirit in London, England. They had wanted to do an Indigenous part of their program, and since the Micromania Film Festival is based in Buffalo, they said, why don't we have Seneca? And it turned out both of the directors of the film festivals knew me personally, so they asked me to come and curate. At first I thought it was going to be a little bit I thought it was more administrative doing curating, but then when they mentioned that they were going to pay screening fees to the filmmakers, I thought, oh, that's a great opportunity for me to come in, and I just put a posting on Facebook and asked for submissions to the Micromania Short Film Festival, or Short Film Program, and I think I got a good response. I got 12 films. I took them all. I didn't have to leave any out.
And then I think one of the Sonic Casino picked it up and actually brought it to their facility as well, right?
Yeah, so we screened last year at the Birchfield Penny. We had a great turnout. The CEO of the Seneca Niagara Casino was there. He came in. The program was, I think that was 12 films over 35 minutes, but it was sort of the way the films spoke to one another. I had also edited how the screening order, but it really found this unique way of having this journey of all these different short films. And when they saw it, it was really emotional for everybody. And he says, I want to bring that to the casino as part of their Native Heritage Month in November. So it was great. They were able to provide more funding, especially to bring out-of-town filmmakers in. So it actually we screened at the Bears Den and had a great turnout there as well. So then we're doing it again this year as well.
Now, I want to get in a little more about the themes that we're going to be hearing and seeing on Saturday, but I also want to just give a quick plug out to Lucia Costello. Couldn't be here because she's feeling a little under the weather, but she is the one who is bringing the Micromania Film Fest to Buffalo, and with a lot of different sessions coming up in the coming weeks. You want to find out more, you can go to sparksfilmmakers.org. But we're with Terry Jones right now. And Terry, these films that we're going to see on Saturday, what are some of the themes? I wouldn't say necessarily is there one theme or two themes, but what are some of the themes that emerge? Because a lot of this is self-representation. That's the idea that we want these filmmakers to put together something that says something about themselves or shows what what they are feeling and expressing.
One of the things that when I started to curate this program was that I wanted the casual viewer to be able to come in. I know they would already come in with their preconceived notion of what a Native film
we've seen in other films for 100 years, right?
Exactly. Okay. And what I wanted to do here was to have a wide array of Haudenosaunee filmmakers and filmmaking styles, which included narrative, experimental, documentary, dance, animation, and that's sort of what we got. And this year's program, there's my personal film that I included is called Savage Future. It's an experimental film where I shook Iroquois white corn as a soundscape and slowed it down, and then I just created very simple images of my own personal family's experience with the Thomas Indian School or the residential schools, and on a micro level, and then the story makes it go macro, and I bring it back to micro. And there's another film in the slate that's a trailer for a longer film called Remaining Native. I think she's a Six Nations filmmaker, Paige Bethman, and there too is a theme of Indian residential schools. So I thought those two would play really well together. Another big thing that I really like this year is that we have 4 youth films made by Haudenosaunee youth. One is from a 12-year-old Seneca who did a 30-second animation. I was blown away by how I wouldn't even be able to do that sort of animation. Another one was created during the summer of a theater camp that I was an instructor on. To the participants wanted to make a short film. It's called Massa Cookie Massacre. It's about a.
I'm sorry for laughing.
It's a comedy horror film. They came up completely with the idea. I brought in. I was more their mentor. I helped them with the logistics of it. But in the end result, I liked the film so much that I actually programmed it in with the program that's going to be shown at the Birchfield. Another one I think is a longer form. I'm not really sure what exactly it is. It's a trailer, but it was one of the participants who has a film here, Paulette Moore. She had conducted a media workshop over the summer in Six Nations Reserve, and there too they made a long form film, but they included a trailer that we're going to show as well.
It's interesting to hear, like, for example, I'm sure you have experience in making films, but not everybody necessarily is all that experienced that are putting together these micro short films. Is that part of the concept, that we want to try to see what other people can do and how they can express themselves?
Yeah, one of the good things as well with this program is that when the filmmakers are able to come to the screening, a lot of times these are just done in our own laboratories on where we're from. We have the concept with the idea. We find the way to tell the story. Sometimes you might not have like a Hollywood style glossy film product in the end, but good storytelling. Sometimes you don't need that. Sometimes the DIY format works really well. But there are a fair amount of these projects are really top notch. A few of them feel amateurish, but that's okay. That's part of the process. The idea is to amplify not just established filmmakers like myself, but emerging filmmakers, especially youth filmmaking. That when we're all in the same room, we're able to say, "Wow, we all learn and inspire from one another." And not only that, but we also include the general audience to take part as well, which includes our own community, but also our neighbors, the Buffalo community, to allow them to come in and learn something new, especially in a space where we weren't necessarily really included or invited into, like the Birchfield Penny. It's so really grateful for them for providing the space, because I wouldn't know where I would be able to have that sort of built-in audience community, artist community to come support the program.
And I guess then to take that, then do we see? I mean, you've got experience. Do we see an emerging sense of this artistry coming from Haudenosaunee or Indigenous people? I mean, is that so? I mean, we're hearing a little more conversation, but are you actually seeing it?
I do, but like I said, sometimes for me, we're dealing with people's notion of what a native film feels like. So in order to dispel that, it's not presenting these stories, these very unique personal stories, in a way that we feel people need to see it. They do it. It's a form of self-expression that just is. So then when we invite someone to come and look at it, they're like, "Wow, I didn't know that." A story is a story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Hopefully it has themes or characters that are universal, and we all do. When I think of storytelling as an Indigenous, doesn't make us any special. We all want the same thing. We want to take care of an environment. We want to take care of the kids. We want to take care of who's here. We want to plan for the future. We want to take care of our elders, and and we want to respect one another and respect the environment. And that's pretty universal that anybody can identify with. So with these sort of film projects, hopefully they'll go in and say, "I understand that." Even though they're Indigenous, I understand that story. I can relate to that story.
Obviously, if you're talking about the residential schools, there's just such a history of pain and again, things I think that the general public just still finding out about. But what about in terms of, do you sense hope coming out of these? So do you see that type of thing inside the artistry again that you're seeing out of these micro short films?
Yeah, especially when it comes to something like Indian residential schools, for me it's entertaining, but it's also educating at the same time. I'm sorry, I'm just blanking out.
Yeah, but is there a sense of hope? I guess is what I'm saying. That this is on the road to something better.
Yes, yeah. For me, when I tell these. I call them sometimes difficult stories. History is history. It's in the past, but we can learn from history. There's that whole thing where we're bound to repeat history unless we learn from our past. For me, my particular piece called Savage Future, it's a deep subject. It's a dark subject. It can be a dark subject, but I've heard people who've watched it and they feel like there's a sense of hope in for it. So for me, it's a sense of me being able to express this difficult history to a casual viewer, but at the same time, in the end, hopefully they'll walk away with a sense that, as I said, we're universal.
That was Jay Moran with filmmaker Terry Jones. The 5th annual Spark Micro Short Film Festival is taking place in September. For more information, visit the website sparksfilmmakers.org. And that will do it for today's Summertime Producers Picks episode. We would like to thank our guests, Stan Martin, Ebony White, Reggie Keith, and Terry Jones. If you missed anything and you would like to hear it again, a reminder that this program is a podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts or the new Amplified BTPM app. And each episode is available online, on demand at WBFO.org. This is WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WBJ Jamestown, your NPR station. This is Charles Gilbert. Thanks for listening.
My name is Damon Fordham, and over the last 20 years, I've gone through libraries, archives, old museums, and interviews with the elderly to get the stories that have been seldom told elsewhere, and I've collected them into 4 books, a newspaper column, a radio show, a YouTube channel, travels around the country, courses that I teach, and this tour called If These Streets Could Talk, The Lost Stories of Black Charleston. One of the things that's not often discussed with this is the status of free blacks. Now, in those days, in order to be free, you had to have what was called manumission papers. And there was nothing stopping anybody in those days from going, oh, are these your manumission papers? Oops, silly me, and selling that person back into slavery, okay? Plus, you didn't have the right to vote, nor any real constitutional rights until the 14th Amendment in 1868. And even if you went to the North, it wasn't a haven of freedom, because you could easily have somebody recapture you or accuse you of being a runaway and sell you back into slavery. The most famous case of that is Solomon Northup, who wrote a book about his experiences called 12 Years a Slave that became a popular movie 10 years ago. And there were many states such as Illinois that didn't want free black people at all, because the residents were told that the presence of free blacks would make them work, they would work cheap and take their jobs. Sound familiar? Hello. Now, however, you did have cases of free blacks who were educated and were entrepreneurs. One such person was Nat Fuller, who in this building, prior to the Civil War, owned a restaurant called the Bachelor's Retreat. This is where the well-to-do white men of Charleston would come after work and smoke cigars and drink brandy and enjoy his fine cuisine. The Confederacy fell in Charleston on February the 18th, 1865, when a black Union regiment, the Massachusetts 55th, marched through here, and the Confederates surrendered. And they left here for about a year and a half. So during that time, the only white people left here were the Unionists. That is, the white people who supported Abraham Lincoln and the Union. So Nat Fuller was so moved by this that in this building in April of 1865, he threw what was called the Dinner of Reconciliation, also known as Nat Fuller's Feast. This is the first known recorded case below the Mason-Dixon line where blacks and whites broke bread at the same tables in a public restaurant. And after the dinner, Nat Fuller was so moved that he raised his glass in a toast to Lincoln and to liberty. And on the 150th anniversary of this in 2015, 150 or so Charlestonians of both races were invited here for the commemoration of that dinner. And at the end of the dinner, they all raised their glasses in a toast to Lincoln and to liberty. And among the guests that night was yours truly.
Seriously.
This is historic Broad Street, where most of our historical buildings are located, and most of them have some really interesting history to it. The black building behind us, the number 91, that was the very first black-owned law firm in the United States. The first black lawyer in America was Macon B. Allen, who was born a free man in Indiana in 1816. And in the 1830s, as a young man, he went to Maine, and during his time in Maine, he studied for and got his law license. So he practiced law in Boston in 1845. In 1868, 3 years after the fall of slavery and the end of the Confederacy and the rise of Reconstruction, he came down here and started his law practice in that building with two black Charlestonian lawyers, Robert Brown Elliott and William J. Whipper. Robert Brown Elliott made history in 1871, where against the fears of his wife, he testified against the brutality of the Ku Klux Klan before Congress. And so that testimony so moved President Ulysses S. Grant that President Grant signed the Enforcement Act of 1871 that made domestic terrorism a federal offense. So every act of domestic terrorism that has been to our court system since then has, from the Ku Klux Klan up through the people who bombed and burned ROTC buildings during the Vietnam War era, up to the events of January the 6th, all of these have been prosecuted under the Enforcement Act of 1871, and we owe all that to Robert Brown Elliott, who practiced law in that building until the fall of Reconstruction in 1877. Afterwards, he went to New Orleans, where he died of tuberculosis in 1884 at the age of 42.